Thank you everyone for joining us today. We've got ASAPbio and Arcadia for today's session, and we're going to be talking about gauging the impact of science, which is relevant especially to the really cool stuff Arcadia are doing, but also any of you who are in the preprint space and want to help your own science get out there and measure how well you're doing, away from all these traditional metrics that we use. So as you're joining, feel free to drop in the chat your name, location, and how you determine if a piece of research is relevant to you and your interests. We've got two speakers today. We've got me hosting this call, which is an honor always to host the guys from Arcadia. And then we've got Prachee and Robert. Prachee is the co-founder and CSO of Arcadia Science, a company focused on applying the evolutionary lens to open science practices to really accelerate the purposeful discovery of nature's greatest innovations. She's also a prominent advocate for open science and held a variety of different leadership roles all over the place in that element. She's been at the Asteria Institute. She used to be with us at ASAPbio and was at eLife. I assume you're going to be somewhere else next as well. She is unstoppable. Robert is the publishing project manager at Arcadia Science and works on building sustainable, replicable, and effective workflows and tools for scientists to quickly share their work. Alongside that, he is working with the rest of the publishing team to design new ways to measure and communicate the utility and impact of publications to those who can build on them. This is a really, really important topic. I think it's a very timely topic as well, and it is desperately needed for different ways to evaluate science. And these ways really need to capture the true value of what science is and what it can be, but also how we display these things, not just to other researchers, but to funding bodies, institutions, the general public. And neither of our organizations have a definitive answer on this. And so this is going to be a very interactive session. We want all of you to participate in a very open discussion about how we can measure and communicate the impact of science outside of these very traditional mechanisms that we're all used to. If you have anything to contribute as we go through, use the raise your hand function or drop any questions you have in the chat. We have a couple of people from Arcadia monitoring the chat. We've got Jasmine and Megan and some other Jasmines in here. If it's a Jasmine, probably from Arcadia, and they will respond to any questions that are a bit more general. If you have any questions about ASAPbio, again, drop those in the chat and I will get to those as everyone else is speaking. If you have questions that are more directly related to the topic at hand, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will get to you when we get to the Q&A session. But we've got quite a structured Q&A session as well. So when we reach that bit with Robert, I will help guide through as we unmute and ask away with the questions. With that, I will hand over to Robert.
Yeah, so this is going to be, like Johnny said, thank you for the great introduction. We're going to have a hopefully very interactive session to talk a little bit about the topic at hand. So just for a brief introduction to the agenda, Prachee is going to talk a little bit about the philosophy at Arcadia, why we publish the way we do, and then I'm going to give a little bit of an update about where we are, what we've learned, and why we're interested in measuring impact. And then as a little bit of a teaser, so you can start thinking about it, the Q&A session is really going to be trying to figure out how we determine if research is basically useful to other people. And we're going to try and break that down into a few subsections to try and really get at the heart of the issue, which is if it's verifiable, has it been replicated, and has it been built upon? And then depending on time, we'll have a little bit of a general Q&A at the end. So that'll be kind of the run of show. And I think I'll pass it off to Prachee now to talk a little bit about who we are and why we publish the way that we do.
Great. So thanks so much, Robert. Thanks, Johnny. Thanks to everyone who's here. It's really great to see a lot of friends in the list here for participants and also some new folks. So really glad to connect with you, and feel free to obviously get in touch with us. We're really interested in obviously engaging with the outside world. You know, all the good ideas don't live in one place. They live wherever they live. We know that the community is really you know, a driving force in how we share our science, and we really want to make sure that the good ideas that people are coming up with are you know, things that we are able to engage with and interact with and try to build into our way of thinking. So as Jonny mentioned, yes, we built Arcadia Science, where the idea, where a lot of things we're trying to reimagine how we do science, how we fund it, how we communicate it. And when we think about trying to accelerate how we do science for advancement of society, really what we're trying to do is pull out the stops to say, what is sort of getting us closer to advancing the substance of the science, and what are all of the other things that we do that may not be related to that. There may be plenty of reasons, and people in whatever circumstance they're in are really interested in sharing their science in certain ways. But if we are, for us, we're sort of trying to have, acceleration of our science, and the utility of what we do be the sort of North Star of this whole publishing experiment. So that means that we want to optimize for these things that Robert's showing here, which is speed. And one thing that is sort of underlying all of this is very much agency. So author agency, making sure that you as the researchers, us as the researchers, when we think science is ready to be shared with the world, that we can immediately do it. We're living in an age where that is possible. We don't need others to disseminate our work. The internet exists. Can we actually get the work out there as quickly as possible and to the broadest group possible, so that it's easy for us to share and free for others, and easily accessible for others to read. The broader reach we have, the better. Obviously, scientists live everywhere, and we want them to be able to have access to the work. So now, if we're saying like, okay, for us, trying to make sure that the science that we do is actually useful, both to us and to others, our aspirations are to accelerate our own science with what we're doing in-house. But again, it's a collective enterprise. We don't expect to do this on our own. When any of us do a piece of science and we release it to the world, now we live in a universe where everybody on Earth can interact with that and build upon it. And now we then live in a new reality where more information is available. And so even if we were to go back and work on it again, it's now richer and more advanced than it would have been if we kept it to ourselves, right? So that's a very pragmatic thing. We think about just in our goals to accelerate what is possible, having not just us build on science, but the sort of collective scientific universe contribute to that. We want to be able to share that early. And so when we think about that sharing, you can imagine, as we have, and as many of you have found out in doing science in your own lives, that just dumping something somewhere where people can see it is sometimes insufficient. First of all, just because if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? Does it matter for us to share it if it's not discoverable, if people are not using it, if people are not interacting with it, or if it's difficult to do that, right? So a lot of times having access to information doesn't mean that it's necessarily usable. If it doesn't have structure, if it doesn't have metadata, if it doesn't have appropriate context around it that allows people to understand what's been done and have access to all of the underlying properties of that, it really is important for its utility. And also just having it be in a way that people can understand it. So at least the scientific audience that might care about that science, and then outside of it, where they may not be specifically in the field, but might have some useful contributions to it that could accelerate it orthogonally. So we are interested in that early rapid sharing, having it maximized for utility, which means that we want to display the data and the science in a rich way that allow people to interact with it and use it and understand it. And then, of course, we really care about making sure that we are doing rigorous science. And of course, we have our own, all of us as scientists have ideas about what that should be. But the strong, feeling and my very strong opinion is that, the way that we sort of gauge rigor and quality right now in sort of pre-publication peer review is not the best we can do. In my mind, it's not the gold standard. It's the worst we can do. That really having sort of, 3 secret people gauge the they're on the opinions, have their opinions on the basis of what they've read the moment that it drops, is an extremely imperfect way to sort of understand that science and decide whether or not it has value. ultimately, the quality and rigor of science is determined over time. Whether or not it gets built upon, whether or not it gets replicated, these things, and whether it stands the test of time, that is something that really collectively gets, seeps into our understanding of whether or not science is of high rigor and quality, rather than what we think about it the moment we read it when it drops, right? So for us, that's why our publishing model is very much built upon this early sharing directly from the scientists, and then also having it be any sort of things that happen on top of that happens post-publication. So we want to have comments and appear on our research post-publication, and we want those to be public. The other key feature is that the discussion around science, we don't want that to be secret. It's not just that experts weighing in on science only benefits the authors. It also benefits the readers. We all know that we want to have an understanding of what experts think about science, and have that be visible to other readers. So it's very, very important to us from the beginning. We've said we really only want comments to be public. If people send us private comments, we ask them if they will post them publicly. And we act on things that we get public comments on. So strongly encourage that open discussion so that the entire scientific community can benefit from that conversation. So these are some of the sort of key features, post-publication review, in as much as there is review. But again, that opinion at the moment drops is just a drop in the bucket. So that means that we really want to have, not our science to be sort of verified with some sort of stamp of approval, thumbs up or thumbs down in the form of an acceptance to a journal. We don't submit to journals, but we really want that to be not verified, but verifiable. We want to we share our data, our code, our protocols. We put everything in repositories, all different aspects of our science, so that it can be reused, it can be replicated. We want to make sure that the actual substance of the science that is possible to evaluate is available the moment that our science drops. So those are our aspirations, to really get away from sort of the signals of quality to the substance of it. And that's really what we're here to discuss today. Can we actually make any progress on understanding what that substance really is, and how can we make sure to engage with the science on that level rather than on the appearance of that, which we have all know that we're used to doing. So I'll leave it at that. Our work can be found on our website. So again, we don't publish in traditional journals. Research.arcadiascience.com. The QR code is there. You can see all of everything that we release is available there. And you can see all the places where we link directly to our repositories and protocols and other things. And there's public commenting on there. So I strongly encourage you all to play around on that site. And if anything catches your eye scientifically, strongly encourage you to leave a public comment or engage with us publicly in any way that you can, so that others can also benefit from your expertise and your thoughts. Okay, I'll leave it there. I could talk about this forever, but let's not.
We're going to talk about it a little bit more, because I'm going to give everyone a little bit of a sense of where we are and kind of provide more context for what we're talking about today, and also why we care about this. So like Prachee said, we release our own publications on a open source journal independent platform called PubPub, and I'll say anyone here, you can sign up for a PubPub account and publish anything you want for free. And it's been almost 2 years to the day, actually, since our first publication was released. So since then, we've released 46 pubs, and we've done it in about 46 workdays. So that just goes back to the speed we were talking about. We're trying to release things very early on in the research cycle. And I'll say that many of these publications are things that you wouldn't traditionally see published, like negative data, open questions, ideas, perspectives. There's a wide range of things alongside like software tools, results, data sets, and those sorts of publications. And at the time of publication, 100% of the code we generated, data that we used, other files like 3D printing files, protocols on protocols.io were available openly. We use a variety of repositories like Zenodo, protocols.io, GitHub. So all of those things are freely available to anyone who wants to replicate or build upon what we've released. And like Prachee mentioned, we really encourage, public comments. And since we've released those pubs, we've had more than 100 public comments on the pubs. Of course, we want to make sure that we have more in like a bi-directional flow of information where we can also engage with those comments. So we're always hopeful that people will find our stuff useful and want to leave public comments to benefit any other reader who might come across the work in the future. Yeah, so citations, of course, not the best metric, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about, but we have had 5 external groups cite our pubs, which is an indication that these things have been replicated or reused. And many more have also cloned GitHub repositories, downloaded data sets, or run protocols. And as we get more into the questions, I would kind of keep this in mind because while we do measure these things, like how many clones we have or how many visitors and downloads, those can lead more toward vanity metrics. It doesn't really help us understand how something was used, and it's difficult to kind of pull all of those things together to be an actually useful image of our science. So I would keep that in mind as well once we get to the discussion section. And then also we are not just, trying to do this in an insular fashion. We also really encourage our scientists to contribute public comments elsewhere. And as of right now, we've contributed more than 2,000 public comments on over 400 preprints. And we use another free open source tool called Hypothesis that you can use to annotate basically anything on the web. So we always encourage other people to also go in and leave comments on preprints and try and contribute in that bi-directional kind of way. And there's more. So there's a lot of people that we've talked to who are using our tools, who are replicating them actively or expanding them. And that to us is a big indication of utility and also of our own internal rigor. And just for kind of a sense, if you haven't seen an Arcadia pub before, and this is something we're also constantly iterating on and thinking about is kind of what we display to people so that they can quickly understand if this will be useful to them and if they can use it. So, we have like titles, a few tags like data sets in the top, when it was last released, a short brief summary, and also links immediately to all of the data that we used, any assemblies, code, anything that would be necessary to replicate the work is put right at the top here. So, and of course, if you ever try and use one of our pubs and you have feedback on this, or if there's any ideas that you have, please feel free to leave a public comment so that it can benefit anyone who might think about sharing their science in this way. So yeah, that's kind of a quick image of where we are right now. And I'll say like, this is not the end state for us. We still have a lot of open questions and we're constantly trying to make it better, faster, more useful, for both our scientists and also for the outside world. So this isn't the end state. We're still thinking about a lot of different things, including the topic that we're talking about today, which is measuring impact. So this is kind of why we're thinking about measuring the impact of our publications and also kind of sharing those learnings more broadly and having a conversation like this is that, like Jonny said at the beginning, some of the journal level metrics that we're used to are pretty unreliable and opaque. I'm not going to preach about that a lot, but that's kind of where we're starting from in this discussion. So we're kind of interested in more low lift output level measures to determine if our science is verifiable. Like Prachee said, can someone replicate the work? And these are just some example reasons that could allow a potential user to quickly filter if they'll be able to use it or if it's interesting to them. Many other reasons to do it, but that's just one example. If it has already been replicated or applied in some way, which is another indication of rigor and utility that we're interested in. And then finally, was it built on or expanded? This is something that we're very interested in just because we are trying to make the most maximally useful science we can. And that's a very direct indication of utility, rigor, and impact if we're able to accurately measure it, follow it, and figure out how it can be improved. Yeah, it can inform potential next steps and improvements, both for us and for anyone else who might encounter the work and wants to, continue on with it, build off of it, or improve it. And it also facilitates more downstream work. One thing that has been built can then be built in many different ways, and you can end up with this complicated web of tools that can better inform how impactful one thing is beyond its immediate reuse. Like a software tool being reused in multiple places or integrated into a future pipeline, we can see kind of a exponential expansion of impact if we're able to accurately measure it and keep an eye on it. So that will lead us kind of into the bulk of this, which is kind of the guiding star of this discussion is how can we effectively determine if a scientific output is useful? And I'd say like don't be stuck simply on like this only this wording. This is just kind of a jumping off point. And if you have other ideas, and like Jonny said at the beginning, we're also interested in determining it and then figuring out how to communicate it to people. So please think about that as well as you're thinking about these questions. And to try and break this down into more, easily digestible chunks, we're going to start with the first one, which is what we talked about, if something is verifiable. So the question that we chose to kind of start off this discussion is when you try to replicate or use research, what do you look for first? And I think with that, we could get started on anyone who wants to contribute to that or get started. That's our first question.
Please do raise your hands if you have an answer to that question. And you all have an answer to that question because you partially discussed it when you first joined the call.
One of the things we're really interested in, like maybe can just say while people are thinking about weighing in, is that, I think as we practice the science, there's a lot of discussion about not enough replication attempts and things like that for science. But when we practice the science, and read something that someone else has done that we want to base our science on, the first thing we do is see if it works in our hands, right? Before we build our own science program or do further work on it, right? So it's a thing that I think is pretty common in the workflow of science, of people sort of trying to make sure that the other people's results actually sort of are replicable in their own hands before they build upon them. So the degree to which, I know we're all doing this, but so it's sort of teasing it apart to try to understand like what are we looking for to make that happen. So would love to hear people's thoughts on maybe even the other way to frame it is what frustrates you when you're trying to replicate something in your own work and are unable to do so. So what's missing? Maybe that's another way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Adolfo?
All right. So first of all, it's very, very difficult to replicate research because so it depends on what you're trying to replicate. If you're trying to replicate an enzyme purification protocol, then you're more likely to succeed. If you're trying to replicate a computational pipeline or of analysis, it's very, very difficult because in order to replicate, you would have to use the same, you would have to process the same data in the same way with the same software versions and whatnot. And that is very, very difficult. And been there, done that many, many times is very, very hard. Even the memory, even the hardware of the computer can affect the results and so on. And so it's very, very hard. It's like there is a window in which you can. So it's a gray area. Replicate research is a very, very gray area, and most people protocol don't provide enough details on how they did things. So not all publications are the same, and replicability and reproducibility do not affect all publications the same. It depends on what they are reporting. So this is a very complex area, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one thing I would say about this is that, part of this is an artifact, like not actually providing the information needed in order to reuse or replicate the results is often an artifact of the fact of the way and the workflow in which we do science, having sort of, and this is a key difference in how we do things at Arcadia that has really transformed some of this, is that, instead of doing like work, and then stop and then write, and collect all of the information and share it, when you from the get-go intend to share all of the work and the data that is associated with your research, it does change, just to make things easy for yourself, you start to do things a little bit differently, which is to have better data hygiene, collect information as you go, document things a little bit more carefully as you go, so that when you're ready to share it, it's easy to flip it open rather than try to mop up after the fact and make sure you have all the context and information and metadata and things needed in order to share. So I'm hoping that what we get to, just by virtue of other types of data sharing and research sharing mandates, is knowing that people are going to need to share that data down the road. People will start, even without being required to or mandated to do so, will start to make their lives easier and start having better data hygiene and, collecting that information as they go, so that it becomes more naturally easy in order to sort of replicate results.
But so let me complete so first of all, there are absolutely, but there are no official guidelines on what to do, and it's going to depend on the education of the PI or director of the group or whatever that is going to determine that. But there are some parameters that we cannot control. For example, the metadata is associated with NCBI FASTQ files. NCBI has been stripping, some information. So a group might sequence something, get results, and then they go and submit to NCBI, and NCBI has removed this metadata, and God knows how that might affect the pipelines after people download the database, the data from NCBI. And this has been to affect data that has been submitted for 10x Genomics, for example. And people have been unable to replicate results because NCBI stripped that metadata from the file. So I guess my point is there are parameters that we can control and there are parameters that we cannot control.
Mhm.
Binay?
Thanks, Jenny. Hello, Prachee, Robert, and everybody else. I think any direction or any efforts towards making science more open is welcome, and I think this is an excellent initiative. But can I ask you a more generic question about the company before I go into the verification? What's the business model for Arcadia? And I'll want to tell why this question is extremely important for academics like us, because, okay, I'll have you answer that.
Yeah, no, I know exactly why it's important, but also, so for us, the science that we do is in-house. So we don't sort of take in external science, but the goal for us is to try and accelerate, use evolution as a shortcut, try and accelerate our science so that we can land on innovations that might have useful purposes, and particularly in therapeutics. So the idea for us is we are developing these mechanisms by which to leverage evolution to come up with better innovations and starting points, have stronger hypotheses, and then start science in-house, get that to a point where, that's very early stage scientific research where we're mining things from the tree of life. That's very early stage before there's typically interest and investment in that sort of thing externally. So the idea is for us to do that early, de-risking of the basic science in-house to the point where it gets, attractive for external funding. And then the goal is to spin out companies from Arcadia. So we're sort of like a company creation studio or an incubator where we spin out our internal science in its own company, one that we will have equity in, such that should it go off and generate revenue, that would come back and help make us self-sustaining. So the goal is for us to sort of send out companies into and that's as you can imagine, starting a company and spinning it out takes a good amount of time. So we are investigating other ways in which we could actually leverage the mechanisms by which and the workflows that we are generating that are accelerating our own science, we think will be useful to other people as well. So we are thinking about other more short-term strategies. But for us, the thinking is that it's very hard to commercialize something. It's very hard to come up with something that's going to actually, be the basis of a successful company. So the vast majority of what we do is very early stage, much upstream, and is of much greater utility to the universe than it is to us commercially. So, and because we think that by having that conversation publicly, that will accelerate the science for us and for everybody else. So our goal is very much, is to share the vast majority of what it is that we're actually doing in-house. And that means okay, so by the time something is actually the basis of a company, some small, asset or commercializable thing, there might be some fraction of those things that we ultimately end up protecting, but that will be in the company that spins out. So for us, the vast majority of what we're doing is going to be, again, more of greater utility externally, and we want it to be as useful as possible, which is why we put in all the extra work for the scientists and the publishing team to have all of this rich data available, so that it's not just like a commercial for the science.
So if I can simplify what you just said, is you have two different directions. One is a publishing platform, which is for you internally, as well as for people like ourselves externally to put their papers and to review. Is that right or wrong?
No. Okay, so to be very clear, so that the platform that we are using, it's one that I selected specifically because it is one that can host many other communities and organizations. Because we suspected that if we tried something that people were interested in, they would also want to publish there. But we are not a publisher. We do not publish other people's science. Arcadia publishes their own science by getting it out directly. And instead of building a platform ourselves or our own way of doing it, we're using one that we know is available to others. So this is the pub platform. So we are not our business. So publishing is not our business. Publishing is what we do to accelerate our own science and do an experiment to show that we can accelerate our science by doing open science, and we can do more rigorous, better science by doing open science. But we are not, we do not generate revenue through our publishing model, and we are not open to other people to publish on our site. But we are using a platform that is available to others should they want to generate their own community or site on the same infrastructure. Does that make sense?
Okay. Gotcha. And how do you have one system where you can incentivize reviewers? Because one of the important point of right now, if you ask any journals, they're chasing reviewers like crazy. And honestly, I think we as reviewers, as scientists, are totally disregarded in the process because we put so much of time, efforts, and we don't get anything out of it. And in fact, sometimes, if I may just take a tangent, if you see recently what has happened with AlphaFold3 and Nature Review, even the reviewers did not get to get the raw code. And in fact, this is just not just outrageous. This is just outlandish. I mean, we can't even think about reviewers not getting the codes. Forget about we as the user. So I think unless there is a system, it may be financial, it may be something else, but unless there is a system which is built in that incentivizes reviews, and we have an incentive of doing a good review, I think probably it will have not a long-lasting impact. So I just want to know your thoughts on that.
Can I just jump in and move us along a little bit in the interest of time? Stick that in the chat, because that is a thing we all want to talk about, and I know Prachee loves to talk about this. But we've got two really more interesting questions coming up. What we can do, if it seems is the need, we can always do another call where we talk about Prachee's thoughts more generally on publishing and what Arcadia are doing.
Yeah, just to make sure that we can have a discussion about all three, if we could maybe talk now about the replicated portion. So we had a little bit of thoughts about the verifiable piece. And then this is more about how can you discover attempts at replication and discover, where the flaws might have been, where people ran into issues, both to, improve your science and also to indicate if something has been replicated on an output itself. Does anyone have any thoughts on this piece? I know this is a big, hard problem that's not solved, so any ideas are welcome. Jonny, did you see who raised their hand first? I missed it.
I think it was Bill.
Bill.
Yes. So this is the area where I really rely on citations a lot, and there I still heavily rely on the Commercial Science Citation Index, and especially when dealing with methods or findings that that have been around long enough for people to begin citing. I just find that incredibly helpful. And then the second is, talking with colleagues and, have you tried this? Have you tried that? So, I mean, a part of it is trying to make choices. So, maybe there have been 2 or 3 or 4 methods or pipelines developed around the same time, and then trying to understand, what people have tried, what are failure modes, are there cases where one works better than another, to try to begin to understand the nuances. And you can get a little inference of that from the citations, but then a lot from chatting with colleagues about what have you tried.
Mhm. I'm curious, if you were to see, because I guess in our specific case or science, it's being pretty early, is that citations are kind of lagging, like can take quite a long time to appear. I'm curious if you were to see someone who like left a comment on a publication that said that they tried it before it was cited, would you, I guess I'm curious how you would go about kind of vetting that comment or like thinking about how it would be helpful for you.
You know, it's interesting. As you asked the question, I wonder how my answer would change if I were younger. Now, I'd be very quick to simply send an email. Actually, I haven't looked at how your comments work and whether there's contact information for people who leave comments. But if it were possible, I would reach out, actually, to the authors and to the person leaving the comment, and just try to engage and say it with specific questions,
Mhm.
specific questions or concerns.
I guess one other question. I'm curious if you would feel comfortable like having that dialogue publicly. Like, would you be comfortable replying like directly to the comment and having that exchange publicly, or do you think emailing would be more comfortable? And I guess it could also be theoretical, not just you, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on doing that.
Yeah, so me personally, I would be much more comfortable doing it by email. And I'm sort of on the end of the spectrum where I have never been very comfortable with sort of the um, square public square element of social media, or comment sections or things like that. And I feel I can just have much more engaged, candid conversations with people one-on-one. And so then the next best thing would be email or something like that. So it'd be hard for me to do it in a public forum. And I'd also be unsure how valuable the response would be. And I think part of it is, with things like methods, the devil is in the details. And I think you need to establish a certain level, partially of trust, but also of seriousness. So, when it comes to, getting to the point of, does the choice of detergent matter? Does the choice of salt matter? So going to the biochemical side of things. And, so there's a little bit of trust, but also just a little bit of, the person, you on the receiving end, having developed method, you don't necessarily know how serious somebody is in their queries and how interested and curious they are about the search tree that you've already been through. So you may have sort of a deep bank of experience of, oh, well, we understand that in these cases you want to do it this way. In those cases, you might want to do it that way, or this part of the protocol is really important, we found, for these reasons. But you can't have that level of feedback and engagement with every person who reaches out to you. So you need to reach some level of understanding where you say, this person actually is engaged enough and cares enough or has sufficient experience that it makes sense for me to give them this level of detail.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and actually, and then sort of related back to the first question, the old paper current protocols was sort of, with methods, there's sort of this iterative process with methods where, there's the original report and then people try to replicate, and then you have your own, inked over lab copies where you have found yourself what matters and made notes of, you really need to do this carefully, or this matters. But then, current protocols was sort of a brilliant publication, where you go through the iterations where then somebody sits down and writes a commentary in addition to a protocol, and where they try to distill that wisdom. And so I presume that, with Arcadia's early stages, but I presume, there'll be some bits of work which you're using again and again, and which you refine, and 2 or 3 or 4, and where you see other people using, and then 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road, hopefully you'll then write something up like a current protocol commentary, saying in our experience, these are, these are good use cases, these are things you should consider, so on.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it is something that, because we have the flexibility to publish whatever we like,
Yeah.
to say, aggregate this and actually also build this in the open to say, okay, what have we tried? What have we not tried? And, or even, one of the things we do is actually say when we're no longer pursuing something and for what reason, so that also just so that the assumptions that because we're working on it, no one else should, we in fact encourage everyone else to work on it and say,
Yes.
look, the goal here is not to plant our flag, but to say, here's what we're doing and all the things we do and don't know. And, and we try to sort of capture that in every iteration of our publications where we say, yeah, this is our general thinking as of this moment and what we're stuck on and where we think there are gaps and things, to really like outline that, to say, even our opinion of where things stand at the moment, right? And we may say, okay, and this is where it's going to stay because we're not going to work on this any longer, but here are the thoughts we were left with as we drop this project. All these
Yes.
sorts of things. That contextual information is also very helpful, so that people really don't try to infer that on the basis of what we shared, but really understand the nature and the state of the work as we are working on it.
Mm-hmm. I think just to make sure that we get through, thank you, Prachee. I think Daniela, maybe we'll do that and then move on to the last question.
All right. So yes, I just hello, I'm Daniela, director of peer review. I just actually wanted to say that what excites me the most about all these changes and how we are sharing our research is also this idea of kind of changing the attitudes that researchers have towards one another, of what it means to replicate, what it means to actually give feedback. Because I remember as in grad school, going at conferences and say, hey, I'm trying to like replicate your experiment, and I would get either like a face of like, oh my God, you're trying to replicate my experiments, like fear in their faces, and or like almost anger, or like an attitude of dismission, or I would get very like excitement. And most of the time the excitement was from a grad student, or actually the person who did the experiment, and the PI would get one of their face of like, why are you wasting my time with these questions? And I think that what I would like to see is again also like an opportunity to change this, and like to just bring back that joy of doing science and doing together. So I really appreciate what you're doing, and I know that that's also one of your goals. So thanks for that. That was not a question, just a comment, and a cheer.
Thank you. All right, so just to try and kind of loop back to kind of one of the other main points of this was the built upon piece. So this question, I'm curious, like what could show that your work has been built or expanded upon, and what any work in general has been built or expanded upon. And I'd also be curious if anyone has any thoughts on how they would like to see that displayed on a publication, or if it would even be helpful for you to see that. Would that make you more likely to want to pick it up if you saw some indication that work had been expanded or built upon? I guess I just kind of threw a second question in there, but I would think about it from many different angles, because there's a question that is especially interesting for people that might publish something that they're not planning on working on anymore, but it could still be of interest or use to somebody else.
There was a question somewhere back in the chat, I've lost it, along this theme, asking how you are, when you get feedback, how you're then building that in. So if you do a future pub based on that, how does that work and how does that look?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know, Prachee, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So for us, so the reply that I put in there was that, should someone put a comment that substantively sort of affects the trajectory of our work or impacts our thinking about it, we absolutely we first of all, we use credit taxonomy, or an expansion of credit taxonomy on our publications, so it's very clear like who is responsible for what. So what I always say is that sort of authorship or contributorship is not just about credit, it's also about responsibility. So we try to be as transparent as we can about who did what. But should someone actually, from external person, contribute something that we think is very helpful and has impacted our thinking, then we directly add them. I think as the designation, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, is like critical feedback. So we actually put them directly on the pub, along with the rest of the contributors, as having provided critical feedback. And that's something that they can then, it just lives on the publication. And in some cases, like I said, we do or don't proceed with the work, or we do or don't use some of, this also gets at another question that was asked in the chat, which is who can make a comment? Do we gatekeep? Who are those people? Do we select editors and reviewers and things like that? We don't. In fact, one of the problems to this sort of, feedback limitation or bottleneck is that we're very, traditionally at journals, it's very selective on these things. And I've been part of many different efforts through journals and otherwise to expand that, and the network and the, tools by which you can unearth new reviewers and all of these things. And yet, the fundamental issue is this question of who is weighing in, especially when you're making an accept or reject decision. There's some nervousness around who those people are. And for us, we think, good ideas. And I guess, people are working on things you don't know what they're working on. They have expertise on things you don't know they have expertise in. The students and people with their hands on the work, the actual practitioners of the science are the people who can catch a lot of mistakes and issues with the work. So we have absolutely zero requirements for who could contribute to comments. And we, as people working on the science, and the goal only being to make the science more useful for us and other people, we feel like we have some understanding of what comments are useful to us. And so we will, utilize some of them, not utilize others. So this is where we don't worry so much about there being a flood or fire hose of comments that we feel like we need to address as if they were reviewer comments. We look for the comments that we think are actually substantively going to accelerate our work. And if it does, then we'll contribute, attribute it appropriately. And we may not pursue all those leads, or may say, this is a great idea, someone should do it.
So there's another thing developing in the chat there about, it's coming back to citations again, but the context of the citations. So I mean, ASAPbio held a community call this month about this topic, but maybe that is also something you might want to talk about. And I don't know if you reflect that at all on PubPub at the moment, or if you have that capability, but whether or not that is something you might build into it, and what you think about context of how people are using it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really a key point, especially when we talk about displaying it to folks. Like, I'd be curious to know, what is the most useful way to display it? Is it more of a machine readable thing? I guess it also depends on how you're finding work. So I'd be interested to hear more thoughts about that, because it is not something right now that we can display on PubPub, but it is something that we think about.
Jonny, was this Josh at site?
Yeah, we held Josh last week.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that this is, again, we have no, I like the idea of actually capturing that within a citation, because obviously sometimes you say this is, we were unable to replicate this thing, citation. That doesn't mean that you're actually, necessarily supporting the work. So context matters, of course, but, and why using citations alone is not sort of the richest, most useful thing. I think that, but we have the flexibility to display it any way we wish, which is kind of one of the nice features of what we're doing. And also I think this is, citations are very like a sort of backward looking and often a lagging indicator, as we all know, because it takes a while for things to seep in and sort of make its way into other people's work. But having it also be forward looking, because we can update a publication anytime we want. We can say, oh, this was a really particularly interesting use of the science that we've done by someone else has actually added some functionality onto it. And, we're not pursuing that, or we haven't done this, but this other group has. And we can actually point people to other people's work that was ddone after ours by updating it. So the goal really is to just accelerate what other people can build upon, and they don't need to necessarily, there are opinions on that can be reflected openly.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of displaying this, again, stuck on citations here, but in my mind, like, I'm coming back to those knowledge graphs where you have your seed pub in this case, and then you can show all these different people who've then referenced back to what you've done. You could move beyond that, obviously moving away from citations and using some kind of language model to get a better feel on that. Is that something you've thought about? And then when you're finished answering, Stephen has his hand up.
Yes. Yes, it is something that we've thought about. It kind of goes back to the question that I was asking earlier about what the most useful way to display this would be, and how, because a lot of this as well, at least the way that I'm thinking about it, is also for it to be like very low lift and quick. Like, I don't want people to have to, read the entire thing to determine if they could reuse it or if it'll be useful and how it's been used in the future. So I think part of it is also thinking about the way that it's displayed. And like you said, there are like language models now that could probably distill that information in a more quick, easily readable way. And like obviously a visual aspect like the knowledge graph would be interesting. I think it's just something that we haven't quite cracked exactly what it would look like for us and what the most replicable way would be, because we're also interested in like if we figured out a really good way of displaying that, we would want to release that so that other people could do it in a simple way. I don't know if Prachee, if you had anything else to add, or if Stephen. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is to just double click on that last point, which is something that we think about a lot, which is that, we can do anything. So part of this is that, having tried to make some changes in other systems and other journals and other things, one thing that we have the ability to do is to do things and just experiment with them, see if they work or not, iterate on that, rather than sort of like convince everyone that this is the scalable, perfect solution for everyone right now, but really try to do this rather quickly. But then once we find something that might be a useful way to go about it, we think a lot about making sure that it's not like, oh, well, Arcadia can do that, like good for them, but really is a solution that can be more broadly utilized, because the impact of this is much greater if others can also do it. So that doesn't mean that we take either route in every single case. We want to leverage the fact that we sit in this unique position where we can try a lot of different things and make sure that we do that for others who can't, but then also think very carefully about how we can scale those things if we could land on something particularly useful. So that's the only thing I just wanted to say, even though it's a little bit orthogonal to the point Robert was making, but because he hit on that, I wanted to make sure that we said it very loudly.
I think Stephen maybe, and then we'll probably just need to wrap up.
Yeah, just talking about citations and coming back to this question 3. I mean, it's a few years since I've been research active, so the way I would show my work's been built upon is look for citations but as you say, that's a slow-ish process, but it's speeded up if we get more and more people to be citing preprints. Then obviously the cycle of reuse is accelerated greatly. I mean, one of the things that used to frustrate me, because my field is structural biology, is I would often see people would cite the PDB code of a structure that I had solved, but they wouldn't cite the bloody paper. And so I wouldn't get the citation, so back when I used to care about such things. But now, of course, I think there is more of a culture of actually trying to attach DOIs to code and to data, and I think that is one way then of enabling and recording reuse, so that one can report forward about, it's not just the paper that was important, but the data has been reused. And for some people, it's actually all they've done is generate the data. They never wrote a paper, and this is then a way of demonstrating that value and that utility. So
I think it's such an important point. And also of course, I'm a huge fan of actually having more, persistent identifiers attached to all different types of research products. For this reason, particularly since if you generate a large data set, maybe you take one tiny corner of it and make a paper. That's like a drop in the ocean of its utility, right? So I would actually imagine that the data can and should be cited more frequently and more than the specific thing that was actually like worked on in the paper in many cases. So, but just being able to capture the utility of that data set, if it has, all of the information available to make it more useful, that's something that we're very interested in. So yeah, I love that this is becoming more prevalent and there are more mechanisms to do this.
Yeah, I also want to echo that, like the citation of smaller pieces, like you mentioned, is something for us as well, because we have a lot of, GitHub repositories, and it can be hard to know if someone reran that or where it was run. And I know there's a lot of tools being built to more accurately capture those things. So if anyone has ideas or knows of tools that are effective for that, or anyone working on those sorts of projects, we do have a pub on this on our website on this exact topic with very similar questions. So I would really invite you to comment on that pub with any of your thoughts or ideas on this, because it could be useful to really anyone who's thinking about, citations of smaller work, or making sure that they can figure out if their work has been replicated or reused. But I think that we had a couple just in case we had time, but I don't think we have time. So I was just gonna wrap up really quick and say thank you to everybody who contributed either in the chat. I haven't been able to see what you've been saying, but I'm sure it's been wonderful. And anyone that's also decided to kind of join the discussion verbally. I hope that I hope that this gave you some interesting ideas or new things to think about. I know it definitely did for me, and I really appreciate everybody joining us. I'll say before we head out, the ASAPbio Slack community, there's a QR code and a bit.ly link here if you'd like to sign up for it. And then we also have the Arcadia community. And just a note about the Arcadia community, it'll ask what you're interested in, so you won't be signed up for some big newsletter that you'll get blasted with all the time. It's very specific if you're interested in open science or label-free imaging or a variety of the different things that we work on. So I think with that, I will say thank you. It looks like we have like 2 minutes. I don't know if that's enough for any questions, but I appreciate everybody here. Thank you.
Yeah, I also want to thank everyone, and happy to stay on for a couple minutes. If there are any burning questions or ideas that people have, we definitely would love to hear them. Yeah, and you know, especially if there are things that you've been interested to try and for whatever reason could not, and these are always things that we love to hear about.
I think the takeaway for me from the chat, which is very active, thank you everyone, is that generally Arcadia are getting those first 2 points particularly well just by virtue of having everything open and accessible. That is the biggest barrier, I think, to these issues more broadly. So you're winning on that front really just out of the gate, which is great. Definitely join those communities because they are wonderful, and yeah, please do stay on if you have more questions. I think the other thing that's come up for this is that we need to do another one of these sessions where we talk a bit more broadly on these topics because people have a lot of questions and opinions, and I think that would be great to run in the future as well. But if you do have questions, feel free to raise your hands. We can stay on as long as Prachee and Robert are free.
Yeah, and I was thinking that the other thing that really comes up for this is that, of course, all of this is difficult. You know, I don't want to make it sound like, you know, doing open science is hard. Trying to collect and share the types of information that are most useful to everyone is hard. And that means that, you know, a big barrier and consideration for us is how do we actually lower the lift to make it easy for people to do the thing that will make the science most useful. So those are things that, you know, of course, like the infrastructure folks and everyone who's and even just thinking about workflows and even practical aspects for people to deploy in their own lives is something that's very important, because it, you know, the harder something is, just even small amounts of friction can really, like, you know, compound the effect of slowing down the science. And so just trying to tackle some of these things are also very important. So if anyone thinks of even sort of, you know, simple things, workflow things, infrastructure things, other, you know, anything that could actually lower the activation energy to accelerate the sharing of the types of things that are useful for science to be built upon is also something we're really interested in, because we obviously we have an entire publishing team. Everyone doesn't, right? We try to, because we're trying to experiment with this, but we know that everybody else is also interested in trying to do this. So ways that it affects you and you can solve this problem is something we're also really interested in.
Stephen, do you have a hand up? No. Yes.
Yep.
Is that me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. I just had to say something. It's very interesting. Thank you. It's I think there's so many things I want to say, but basically we need to. I've been in the publishing industry a long time. Before that, I was a physicist. We are sort of held back by even the language. We talk about citations, you know, because we talk about papers. We talk about so many other things, and we always think of a paper as abstract at the top, etc. And it's great you're getting away from this. The paper is important. Let's put it the other way: the narrative, the story is what you want to tell people. But science should not be about writing narrative and then someone mentioned, you know, for example, LLMs, and trying to get back from that, reverse engineer what the topic was. So this is exactly the way we want to go. We want to have facts. We talked about machine readability. I think you mentioned it. I think it was Jonny. But again, what we can have is machine readable, if you like, things like nano publications or triples, whatever you call them. But I'm actually working on embedding these, or thinking about embedding these within an article. So you have an article that it's readable, it's beautifully typeset. I love typography. I go to typography conferences, but that is not the final thing. Behind it is fully machine readable. So, and then I need to get these off my chest. Another thing I put in the chat, research integrity, that I'm heavily involved with. 10,000 papers were retracted last year. So people read these, people cited this, people purchased this, and then they were dumped. So we got to go back. What a waste of time. Somehow we need to make sure that any data that comes out, not only is it open data, but we have full provenance of that data to where it came from. And thank you very much, and I'll stop there.
Yes, super helpful. Fully agree. Please.
Me too.
Rodolfo.
And I also love typography.
Yeah.
I would like to add, first of all, when I discovered the way you guys were publishing your science at Arcadia, I was thrilled. I love it. I love it. But what I would like to add is the we need to fractalize publications more into small pieces, because in my experience, when I run into problems with publications, either texts written by students or whatnot, is because they're trying to get the big picture and they forget the details. If we had a mechanism of micro publishing small things, fractalizing a publication, we would be able to accelerate publications. There's no question in my mind, it will accelerate. So instead of making this humongous, like Jacob and Manot paper on the Lac Operon, just very small things, and those micro publications are going to accelerate machine learning. They are going to be easily fed into machine and easily but more easy to correct or to have a version number and whatever for protocols versus methodology and whatnot. So that is one thing. Is the fractalizing the information is key to accelerate to better describe things. The second thing that I wanted to say is I'm horrified by the lack of involvement. So it's impossible to find reviewers for manuscripts nowadays. Everybody is busy, and then when you find reviewers come back to you with, sometimes they come back with, yeah, this manuscript is acceptable for publication, and that is not a review. It's horrible, and editors have to make decisions based on that, and that is terrible. So there is something happening with the algorithm that selects reviewers that is based on people who publish on the same topic, in the last 5 years or whatever, are suggested as reviewer for publications or that are coming on the same topic, and we are feeding the monster. This is a catch-22 that is snowballing into catastrophe, and I don't know how to stop that. So open publications, the model that you guys is fantastic. The other thing is to measure the how code has an impact. I wish GitHub had a mechanism of giving you statistics on downloads and whatnot. It doesn't. So if you link your GitHub repository to Zenodo, you can follow the number of downloads in Zenodo and have an idea. But right now, GitHub doesn't give you those statistics by themselves. So that's another thing that I wish it could be corrected. Anyway, thank you so much. This has been extremely informative.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems you suggested, it might be a solution. One of the solutions you suggested might be a solution to the problem, which is that if you were to actually modularize or fractalize these publications, it also makes them much easier to review. You don't have this, the idea, you have all of this like very interdisciplinary work that is like mammoth, as you said, and actually having that be something that people are capable of evaluating. It's not that their expertise is fully, covering that, even a fraction of the work, by having there be, sort of more modular research products, you have something that is much more simple for someone to have expertise over and be able to comment on quickly, rather than, this is one of those things where as you read something, we all read things and have an opinion and that gets hidden, right? So being able to unearth those opinions on the aspect of the work that people do have have expertise over. So you can think of that as fractalization or modularization of the research product, but we also would like to do that for the research for reviews. So modularize the reviews. So when we do our preprint commenting every month, we have the whole company comment on preprints, and we say, we're not asking you to do a journal review. We're asking you to take the thing that you think, your expert opinion about the subset of the work that you think, and weigh in on that publicly so that others, the authors and everyone else has some, can benefit from that. And that might be on one piece of one part of one method of something, and it's still of extreme utility. And to not say, like, if you can, or if and only if you have full scope purview over the entire thing, should you weigh in on this. And so I think it's really important that we get into the habit, all of us as scientists, also commenting on the things over which we are expert and have strong opinion, and have that not hold us back from commenting on work, by commenting publicly on preprints and things like this, where especially when there's still an opportunity for that opinion to get incorporated into a next version of the work before it's a version of record.
Just to add to that, we're also trying with a lot of effort in that area of trying to get journal clubs to review preprints. I'm also currently trying to have discussions with institutions to actually get these things embedded into researcher training. So hopefully we're going to see a big shift in the next few years. Stephen?
Yeah, I realize we're running over. I'll keep this short. So I was all ready to comment, and then the doorbell went. So so I have two big questions to leave us with, perhaps, but which I don't expect to be answered today, but might seed the thought for future webinars. But I just wanted to comment on the discussion on micro-publishing and whatnot. And I guess I'm getting old because I don't really get the enthusiasm for this format of scientific publication. Sorry, Kaveh, but to me, I mean, I absolutely agree it's important to share the data, and perhaps we do develop new tools so that one can cite, figure 3 of or whatever paper, because that's the relevant bit. But I just, maybe I'm too old-fashioned in my approach, but I can't see that I ever really want to just sort of publish one experiment, because that might be then disclosing your hand, so you run the risk of being scooped. And also, I think, the data never speak for themselves. As important it is to share them, they always have to be placed in context. Why did you do the experiment? What do you think the results are? Even if somebody else then comes on and says, well, actually, I have a completely different interpretation of your data or those results, and, thank you for sharing them so that I could reanalyze and whatnot. But I'm from Ireland, and in Ireland we like to tell stories, and so I'm a great believer in the value of stories, evidence-based stories, of course, as an Irish scientist, but stories nonetheless. The two sort of larger questions that I kind of wanted to raise. I mean, the conversation this afternoon has been framed really around impact within the scientific community, I think, and so I wonder what measures, or well, actually measures is completely the wrong word, but what processes or avenues are there for evaluating the broader impacts of science? I mean, Prachee did mention, of course, Arcadia's model partly is, if they're doing well, they'll generate ideas that they can spin out, and so actually making money to keep the show on the road will be one measure of the utility or the value of it. It's obviously a much more complicated and multidimensional question, but I think it's one that certainly all publicly funded institutions should be thinking about, and that also then helps to focus on who you think you're serving and how you then might involve the people that you claim to be serving in the sort of design and prioritization of the questions that you ask in the first place. The other question is, although I am myself a big fan of preprints, and I salute all the work that ASAPbio has been doing and Arcadia's approach to this, I really do think it's a model for the future. I wonder, what do people think is still the value of journals in this world? And is there still a value in journals in the way that they can create communities, and the way that actually they then create a way for you to target your research at an audience that is most likely to find it useful, even if, of course, it being open then opens up the prospect that actually someone you never thought might be interested in your work actually crops up and says, oh, I want to build on this. So what's the role for journals in this new digital open world? So I'll leave it there. I'm not expecting answers, but I hope I haven't upset anybody.
And I did put in the chat that I look forward to arguing with you about the smaller units of publication later. But thank you so much. Those are really helpful, forward-looking questions that I think we should all grapple with. And we get this a lot. I think, as you know, for preprints people, this came up a lot. Once preprints became more, normalized, there was I love that the first question is what do we need journals for anyway? And so it's a question we should ask ourselves all the time. And I know everyone has opinions on this, but it never hurts to ask ourselves that question as the landscape evolves. So I think that's very, very helpful. So we'll leave it there, and we do have to run. So Jonny, I'll let you wrap up here.
Thank you, everyone, again. I think it's always a great sign that the discussion is great when it runs over and everyone's super happy to keep it going. As I said, we will probably revisit this probably early next year on a more step back scale to talk about a lot of the things we've touched upon already today. Thank you to Robert and Prachee. You have been great as always. This will be up on YouTube very soon, and please do keep in touch with both of those communities. Thank you, everyone, for getting involved.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much. See you, Jonny. Good to see you.